Do you know why I can't go landscape?
Locked.
But my orientation isn't is also rotate. It still does the same thing.
Is there an app setting?
I don't know. Maybe I'll just put it portrait mode. Oh.
Right. Yeah, sorry, I really don't know. The iPhone or Android?
Android. It does this all the time. I once managed to get it to work. So I will have to go like that. Sorry to the one person watching, I am okay. Okay. Yeah, I can't fix the orientation. Have they? There were about 10, weren't there?
There was more than 10.
So we had about police turn up.
Leah always thinks that.
Are we ready to go?
What do you actually do? Just put it once you filmed it or whatever.
Pardon?
What do you actually do? Just put it once.
We put it on our YouTube channel. Yeah. I mean, unfortunately, the more violent ones get the more views. But no violence today.
That's actually what I was an expert at. Marketing about all online kind of
Thank
marketing
you.
and so forth.
Great. Ready to go?
I don't think that microphone is high enough for you. I thought it was higher than that. It's just dropped.
I mean, obviously, you don't really have any funding.
No, we don't.
Design is to advertise actual marketing.
All right, ready to go?
Yep.
Just want that to stay next to you. Is that cool?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Yes. It's nice.
Ready, Leah?
Sorry, I'll just check the pieces out.
Are you happy with that?
Yeah.
I can take it.
Welcome everybody. Thanks everybody for coming. Anybody walking past, if you're interested in women's rights erosion and child safeguarding failures and you want to support our cause, you're more than welcome to come up and speak or just come and listen to what we've got to say. Today, fortunately, we can just stand here and speak because the violent men that usually come and shout us down don't know we're here. Shout out to the police as well, who have already told me that they won't be able to protect us if any violent men do turn up. Thank you. So, thank you for listening. As we go into 2025, we find ourselves at a critical, if not absolutely surreal time. The ideals of fairness, safety, and truth are under siege by policies that place ideology and revenue above reality. Nowhere is this clearer than in Australia, where recently LGBTQIA+, what does the plus stand for? Anybody know? These policies have absolutely flourished, always at the expense of women and children, always. But around the world, there are glimmers of hope as other countries begin to roll back these harmful policies. So let's have a look at how Australia is going at the moment. Legal gender recognition. In Australia, we now allow people to change the sex marker on their birth certificates with a mere declaration. This self-ID approach has thrown open the doors to women's spaces, services, and sports for any man who claims to be a woman. Madness. Contrast this with the UK, where self-ID proposals faced fierce public resistance and were ultimately shelved. Even Scotland's gender recognition reform bill, which allowed for self-ID, was blocked by the UK government after the Isla Bryson scandal. That's the convicted rapist who declared himself a woman to gain access to a female prison. The uproar highlighted the dangers of self-ID, forcing lawmakers to prioritise women's safety over ideology. Australia must prioritise women's safety over the feelings of rapist men. And it's shameful that we must stand here and say this. Inclusion in sports. Australia's sporting bodies, like Cricket Australia and the AFL, have embraced policies allowing men to compete in women's sports if they identify as female. The case of Hannah Mountsie in women's AFL remains a stark example, if you even needed it, of the physical advantages male athletes bring to female competitions. This isn't that hard.
Move away. No, move away. Please, can we have someone here?
What's she going to say? So you think, look, women can't compete against men? Of course they can't.
It's not fair competition.
Roller, please. She knows all about it. Of course they
Compare this madness to the World Athletics, the international governing body for track and field, which has banned men from competing in female categories. The decision reflects a growing recognition that biology matters in sports. If you don't understand that biology matters in sports, you are on the outside of reality. Shouldn't need to be said, but here we are. The UK has taken steps with UK athletics adopting similar bans to protect fairness for female athletes. Again, it's mind-blowing that this even needs to be said. Healthcare and funding. Australia continues to expand access to gender-affirming healthcare, with Medicare covering treatments like hormone therapy, double mastectomies on teenage girls, and genital surgeries even for teenagers. Gender clinics in Australia have been funded to cater specifically to confused adolescents, despite growing international alarm about the long-term consequences of these treatments. The UK offers somewhat of a contrast following an independent review by Dr. Hilary Cass. The NHS has shut down the Tavistock Gender Identity Clinic, citing significant concerns about the safety and efficacy of its treatments. The Cass report found that children were being rushed into irreversible medical pathways without proper psychological evaluation. This led to a shift away from affirm-only care. As I said before, this shouldn't need to be said. putting children who don't adhere to sexist stereotypes on drugs, hormones, cutting off body parts. It's our responsibility to stand up and say no to this. In Sweden and Finland, similar reversals have occurred. Both countries now discourage the use of puberty blockers and surgeries for minors, prioritising psychological support over insane medical abuse. Australia's public service is leading the charge on workplace inclusion, encouraging pronouns and supporting gender transition policies. Women in offices across this country are forced to accept when Dave turns up in a bad wig and his white knickers. Dave is stunning and brave and ever so courageous for bringing his dirty little fetish to work. Dissent is punished, and speaking up about discomfort or unfairness can cost women their jobs. That's why I'm standing here speaking, because I don't have to share an office with Dave or any other autogynephilic man, but I know women who do. By contrast, in the United States, some states are pushing back. States like Florida and Texas have passed legislation ensuring that workplaces cannot compel speech, such as mandating pronoun use. The tide is turning, with lawmakers recognising the importance of protecting free speech. Australia needs to catch up. In Australian schools, policies now allow students to wear uniforms matching their gender identity and using the bathrooms and changing rooms of their choice, putting our schoolgirls at risk every day. It's up to us to stand up against this. This is not right. Boys do not belong with girls and vice versa. Programmes like the Safe Schools Coalition continue to promote resources that blur the lines between inclusivity and indoctrination. Girls are being forced to sacrifice their safety under the guise of progress. One of the most depraved developments in recent years is the push to validate men as breastfeeding parents. Men are breastfeeding babies. In Australia, there have been cases where men using hormones and drugs, which are banned in some countries due to safety concerns, by the way, have attempted to induce lactation. It is astounding that Australia seems willing to experiment with infant health in the name of inclusivity, ignoring the welfare of the most vulnerable, babies, while other nations prioritise rigorous medical and ethical standards. Again, that is why I'm standing here saying this. As a mother of 2 babies, I simply can't not speak out. Not when I see the normalisation of paedophilia, dressed up as inclusivity. There's a man in Queensland who tried to breastfeed his baby, sold his story to the Daily Mail because he thought he'd be affirmed, like he had been on his whole journey to becoming a fake woman. He sold his story to the Daily Mail because he thought he'd be affirmed by the medical professionals who encourage him to allow his newborn baby to do this. Rather than encourage the normal breastfeeding relationship between mother and baby, they were encouraging a newborn baby to suck the nipples of a man because he thinks he's a woman. This sounds ridiculous. I'm standing here in the middle of Brisbane saying publicly that men should not be able to breastfeed babies. Don't worry, I know how crazy this sounds. However, what he received was total disgust because people can recognise child abuse when they see it. There is no world where a man trying to breastfeed a baby with drug-induced moob discharge should be encouraged. It is all of our duty to call out paedophilia when we see it. Men who try to breastfeed babies should be immediately stopped from doing so and should be charged with child abuse. So the tide is turning from the Cass report in the UK, which feels like an age ago now. Reversals in other European countries. Nations are waking up to the consequences of unchecked gender ideology. They are recognising the need to protect women's spaces ensure fairness in sports and safeguard children from irreversible harm. And let's face it, they want your vote too. Most people don't agree with this. Yet Australia remains stuck in an ideological quicksand, ignoring the mounting evidence and the voices of concerned citizens. Women, children and society deserve better. It's not hateful to say that biology matters. It's not bigoted to protect women's rights. It's not unreasonable to demand that our leaders learn from the mistakes of others. And as we move into 2025, we need to push back more, not out of hate, as they say, but out of love for the truth, fairness, and our next generation, our children. It's time for Australia to wake up and choose the path of reality. And I will be right here speaking out until that happens. Thank you.
Who wants to speak next?
Excellent talk.
Yep.
That was
There you
brilliant.
go. Yeah, that's fine.
Deb, you want to swap over? Oh, right.
Oh, thanks.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm just going to read something from this book by Janice Raymond called Doublethink, The Feminist Challenge to Transgenderism. No one, women, men, children, or trans-identified persons should be subjected to any form of exploitation or targeted for discrimination. Trans-identified persons are entitled to the same human and civil rights as others. Recognising these rights, however, does not mean that we must accept that hormones and surgery transform men into women and women into men, or that persons who self-declare as members of the opposite sex are what they subjectively claim to be, or that hormones and surgery are life-saving and necessary treatments for those seeking transition. Transgender activists champion the right to hormones and surgery for every child who presents as dysphoric, treatments they define as emergency medical care. This rhetoric of dysphoria allows accusers to assert that opponents are depriving children of necessary health care, as if hormones are an issue of life and death comparable to insulin needed by diabetics. Yeah, I can see. Yes. By defining these treatments as a right, trans activists can brand both opponents of affirmation treatment and questioning parents as biased, allegedly depriving children of their civil liberties. Instead of supporting a child's right to protection from the health risks of such procedures, trans activists claim that robbing children of quick affirmation of treatment is life-threatening and may cause suicide. The suicide alarm is used as a cudgel to hammer trans tenets into truths. Suicide numbers are blown out of proportion and invoked widely within trans circles, especially to defend certain medical procedures for young people. Kira Bell, the brave young woman who brought a successful legal case against the UK Tavistock Clinic, has written, "I was adamant that I needed to transition. It was the kind of brash assertion that's typical of teenagers. What was really going on was that I was a girl insecure in my body, who had experienced parental abandonment, felt alienated from my peers, suffered from anxiety and depression, and struggled with my sexual orientation. As she grew older, Belle understood I recognised that gender dysphoria was a symptom of my overall misery, not its cause. After a round of superficial conversations with social workers, Belle was given puberty blockers at age 16, testosterone shots at 17, and at 20, she had a double mastectomy. 5 years later, she detransitioned. The health consequences, however, were not superficial. Infertility, loss of breasts with inability to breastfeed, atrophied genitals, and a permanently changed voice. Writer Max Robinson quotes a friend who argues that if the top priority of all providers of transgender healthcare services was really to help people feel their best, they'd be banging on the doors of the many women talking about alternative strategies for coping with feelings, all formally diagnosable as gender dysphoria. Quick gender affirmation treatment for children reverses the Hippocratic medical principle to do no harm when clinicians subject young patients to iatrogenic or doctor-induced risks that include infertility or chemical sterilisation, vaginal atrophy in girls, and heart problems. Even the notion of harm is inverted when trans activists and clinicians claim the actual damage done to young patients is due to parents and others who reject quick affirmation treatment, a rejection they label as child abuse. Transgenderism has even taken root in US medical schools. Professors besieged by woke medical students are apologising, for example, for using the term pregnant woman instead of pregnant person. Some schools are conceding that the notion of sex is just a man-made creation, an admission that can have disastrous effects if doctors and patients ignore the material reality of sex and its consequences for diagnosis and treatment. Transgenderism is undermining medical training. One student, Lauren, gives an example. Take abdominal aortic aneurysms. These are 4 times as likely to occur in males than females. But when discussed, this sex difference wasn't emphasised. Other sex differences, such as heart attack symptoms, manifest differently in males and females. But sex differences that impact treatment are not part of the curriculum. Lauren continues, I'm not even sure what I'm being taught, and unless my classmates are as sceptical as I am, they probably aren't either. In spite of what Lauren sees happening in medical schools, she's both hopeful for the future and not. She observes that the transgender movement is portrayed as a civil rights movement. It seems virtuous. So how can you fight against something that's being marketed as a fight for human rights? Transgenderism would not prevail if the constraints of sex roles and the demands of toxic masculinity and femininity did not dominate many lives. There would be less need for injurious bodily modifications, including hormone treatment, there would be less need for injurious bodily modifications, including hormone treatment, mastectomies and penectomies, if the trans canopy had not become the reference point for what is actually sex role dissatisfaction and gender non-conformity. Trans advocates have no monopoly on gender non-conformity. Why should gender non-conforming behaviour be confined to the realm of transgender and turned into an object of medical attention? Transgenderism depoliticizes non-compliant behaviour and restricts it to a so-called gender identity. thus making it a question of individual behaviour amenable to hormone treatments, surgery, and self-identification. Clinicians should be encouraging young people to challenge sex roles without rejecting their natal bodies. Gender non-conformity is just what it says, the practice not conforming to role-defined rules and regulations, no matter whether they are traditionally or progressively presented. People shouldn't need to identify as transgender or transsexual to live a gender non-compliant life. Feminists invented gender non-conformity, and we have fought for decades to break out of traditional sex roles and to combat toxic masculinity and femininity, only to see them reappear as variants of transgenderism. Women have battled many gendered restrictions in the professions, higher education, politics and government, roles traditionally reserved for men but historically off limits to women because of our alleged natures. There's nothing innate about sex roles, in contrast to the claims of trans activists, and there should be nothing wrong with people expressing a range of so-called masculine and feminine behaviours and appearances without having to alter their sex. With the spread of the transgender movement, gender abolitionists are now facing another challenge generated by a new world of gender expectations. Feminism seemed to lose its way when trans definitions and gender industry gained ground, and gender non-conforming behaviour was confined to the fictional category of trans persons. The transing of men, women and children is the new progressive version of traditional sex role socialisation, now supported by a huge gender industry, spreading its vast tentacles in influential places. The transing of the history of women, gay men and lesbians is also rampant when our very history is appropriated by trans. Traditional sex role socialisation makes it difficult to be a girl, and the contemporary transgender movement tells girls it has a simple answer to their problems. Just transition. It's easy. Lisa Sellen Davis, a freelance journalist and mother, illustrates the straitjacket of reducing gender non-conforming behaviour to transgender, especially in kindergarten to grade 9, our primary and middle schools. In an article called "My Daughter is Not Transgender, She is a Tomboy," Davis describes a query from her daughter's teacher, obviously wanting to properly identify the girl who doesn't act like most girls. The teacher asks, "Your child wants to be called a boy, right? Or is she a boy that wants to be a girl? Which is it?" The mother responds, "I love correcting them, making them consider their perception of what a girl looks like. She's a girl," I said. The teacher looked unconvinced. The mother reiterates, "Really, she's a girl. My daughter wears track pants and t-shirts. She has shaggy short hair, sporty and strong, incredibly sweet, and a girl." And yet her daughter is asked by her teachers, by her paediatrician, and by people who have known her for many years if she feels like or wants to be a boy. Davis states the initial question might be considerate, but when they keep asking her and are sceptical of her response, the message they send is that a girl cannot look and act like her and still be a girl. We've narrowed what we think a boy or a girl can look like and do. In other words, she must be a trans boy. When feminists are vilified as bigots for maintaining that the trans movement is erasing women, here is one mother's testimony of how girlhood erasure happens when transing takes over and infects law, education, sports, corporations, medicine and universities. What a travesty that the girl's gender non-conformity is measured by whether or not she fits a trans standard and not the standard of being an independent girl. What a disturbing turnaround that gender non-conforming girls are presumed to be trans boys, not simply ordinary girls. They do not kowtow to this version of sex role stereotyping. Transing the gender non-conforming lives of girls is in fact a new demand for gender compliance that operates in the same old way as traditional sex role socialisation, especially by urging young girls into identifying as trans boys rather than as girls. As Abigail Schreier has admonished, stop pathologizing girlhood. The transing of any kind of gender non-conformity is given in many school systems where the curriculum has the power to erase children who do not identify as trans, yet also do not conform to traditional roles of masculinity or femininity. The message David sends to her daughter is, you are an awesome girl for not giving in to pressure to be and look a certain way. I want her to be proud to be a girl. When teachers show films that explore gender and use transgender teaching manuals to instruct kids about gender identity, they are encouraging a substantial number of children to question their sex, particularly when the message is, you might have been born in the wrong body. These teachings may channel many vulnerable gay and lesbian kids into becoming trans or influence those who are uncertain. What writer and publisher Susan Hawthorne has called the trans scam. Start a revolution and stop hating your body, is what attorney Mayor Dillard Smith has said. Radical feminists reject identities such as transgender or transsexual. That some wear makeup or have long hair and are nurturing, and some women don't wear makeup or have short hair and are non-nurturing, should be unexceptional. If we expand the bandwidth to what it is to be a man or a woman, we don't need to seek a change of sex, but rather a change in society's codes of femininity and masculinity. If we expand the bandwidth of what it is to be a man or a woman, trans terms would have little meaning, and certainly we wouldn't need the medicalising of young bodies in order to live in a gender non-conforming way.
We don't have very long left. The police are only here till 11:30. Is there anyone else that wants to speak? Okay. Yeah, we've only got a very short time.
Hi.
Microphone.
I just want to say a woman is an adult human female. Thank you.
Woo! Let's do it. Yeah, just do it. That's all right though.
Welcome to 2025, everyone. I believe we are seeing a shift in the zeitgeist as more people agree that women have been on the raw end of the bargain when it comes to sex-based rights for women-only spaces and women-only sports. The declining influence of this ideology can be seen as pronouns are quietly being deleted as the gender ideology cult falls in popularity in the mainstream.
Yeah.
Shareholders are sick of companies losing money by catering to a noisy minority, with an example of this seen recently with Disney pulling their transgender storyline from their upcoming series Win or Lose. Disney released a statement saying, "We recognise that many parents would prefer to discuss certain subjects with their children on their own terms and timeline. A petition was started in protest of Disney's stance. One of the comments supporting the petition stated, well, if parents don't want their children exposed to trans, then they should just not go see this movie. Well, that's exactly what parents will do, and Disney knows this. Disney, of course, could not care less about parents, their children, or even the trans community. But they do care about making money. So things are changing. Mark Zuckerberg has also recently announced changes to Facebook, allowing greater free speech, stating they are getting rid of a number of restrictions on topics like gender and identity. The trans and non-binary themes have been deleted from Meta's Messenger, and Zuckerberg has reportedly also ordered tampon machines to be removed from men's bathrooms. Given Facebook has over 3 billion active users, this kind of corporate cultural shift can influence change. We are also seeing glimmers of hope in other countries, such as the UK, France, Italy, Denmark, and Norway, as puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, and surgeries are being banned or restricted for children. The USA will return women's sex-based rights, with Trump stating he will prohibit men from participating in women's sports and protect children, with a strong focus on holding the medical industry and schools to account. Unfortunately, progress in this space has not yet been made in Australia. And there is still a way to go. We see this in the upcoming Boston Marathon, where a trans-identified male, the same one who sued a spa for not allowing him to bathe with women, has announced he is going to be competing in the women's category. I know personally women who have sought to get into this marathon, as spots in the world majors are very hard to get into, ones like the Boston Marathon. This man, if he had been forced to compete in the male category, would not have qualified based on the time he submitted. Once again, a woman is missing out for the sake of a mediocre man. We've seen the same thing in Parkrun, a free worldwide weekend running event that has also seen trans-identifying males beating women's records on various courses.
Wankers.
Instead of respecting the rights of women to have their own records, Parkrun have attempted to downplay the controversy by removing all gender, course and age records from its website. They would rather hide the stats than correct its policy. Parkrun creator Paul Sinton Hewitt incredulously stated, "Inclusivity comes first, and fairness, I'm afraid, is affected by the drive towards inclusivity." This is such a shocking and insane statement. Sinton Hewitt has a book coming out called One Small Step. Make sure you don't buy it. I've done a summary for those people new to the interest in fighting for women's sex-based rights. A woman is an adult human female. You can say this. Don't be afraid. Woo! If a boy likes dancing and dolls and the color pink and wearing a tutu, it doesn't make him a girl. If a girl likes playing in the mud and sport and likes to wear her hair short, it doesn't make her a boy. You can have effeminate men and masculine women. Trans ideology thrives on stereotypes. Reject the stereotype. Children cannot consent to puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones or surgery. To commit a healthy child to surgery and a lifetime of pharmaceutical dependency and increased health risks like osteoporosis, heart disease, diabetes, fertility problems and impotency, all before their brain has fully formed, is criminal. Women have the right to their own sex-based sports and female-only spaces. There is no variable to this right. Women that fight for the rights of men to enter female-only spaces and sports do not speak for all women, and they are traitors to their sex. It seems unbelievable that these women even exist, but women who simp for men have always existed throughout history. Those women that advocate for trans-identifying men would have been the same women that protested against the suffragettes in the early 20th century. Ironically, the reason women protested against suffragettes was also based on their belief in the need to uphold sexist stereotypes. And finally, the trans ideology business is run for profit and is worth billions of dollars. But when the lawsuits start en masse, and they will, that is when we will see this cash cow grind to a halt, and it will leave many broken families and victims in its wake. We know the trans community abandoned their own swiftly when the detransitioners come out and say they regret their choices. To the child victims, we won't abandon you, and we won't forget what was done to you and your families. I hope you all have a great year, and fingers crossed the pendulum is finally swinging back to reality, and that soon saying a woman is an adult human female will once again return to the banal statement that it is. If we all hold the line, it is but inevitable.
It feels so weird coming out here to state the blindingly obvious. It just feels so surreal. Like, why is this necessary? And I can understand why people would check out of this issue altogether and just go, oh, I'm sure it'll work out.
Yeah.
Someone else will take care of it. Oh, the government will sort it out. Don't worry about it. It's not that big of an issue. Yeah, I mean, what could possibly go wrong? It's not like they're going to put, men in women's prisons. It's already happened. It's not like they're going to start changing birth certificates and make them completely falsified. It's already happened. They're not going to think about the downstream effects of all of that, because that's someone else's job. Someone else's job. There's a great quote, Thomas Jefferson. The price of freedom is eternal vigilance. And I think about what that means in an Australian context. Because we're coming up to Australia Day. It won't be long before at Anzac Day. And the whole notion of what it means to be Australian is under question at the moment. And the whole notion of what freedom is under question at the moment as well. Because we're told generations of young men gave their lives for freedom. So I'm out here exercising my freedom and exercising freedom of speech, because if you don't use it, you lose it. And so I'm deeply concerned about that. This whole thing hinges on language, about accuracy in language. There's a poster over there about ending violence against women, which becomes utterly meaningless if we don't know what a woman is. If we pretend that a woman is a man with special feelings and a dress. These lies are not sustainable. These lies take a sledgehammer to the very foundations of our entire civilization, and yet we walk past and, oh, someone else will sort it out. Yeah, what's the big deal? Whatever, just chill. I mean, just put some pronouns in your bio, bro. What harm will it do? Starts with pronouns, ends with boys who like pink getting castrated. Oh, no, not castrated. Let's call it gender affirming care. We don't want to trigger people. You got to learn to lie. You got to blend in and capitulate to this newspeak, disgusting Orwellian agenda. There's a lot of money behind it. Some legitimate questions need to be asked about where that money is coming from. The World Economic Forum is not a benign organization. They are sponsoring this big time. The gender industrial complex, it's basically an abattoir for children, and they become lifelong patients. So next time you put pronouns in your bio and think, oh, someone else will sort it out, look into this a bit more. Follow the money, follow the ideas. If the ideas cannot withstand scrutiny, if you can't ask a question, if people are terrified of dictionary definitions, there is no argument here. Trans is anti-gay. It tells confused kids that they might be born in the wrong body. I don't know what's more homophobic than that. So all the civil rights movements of the last however long, I would love for the state government to go back to treating this issue like they did with gay marriage. It took them decades to even give this the time of day. So I would love for the trans thing to be an organic movement and for it to be ignored for decades as well. I love Blu-ray as well. Cool. Blu-ray DVD, awesome. Cool. Yeah, that's all I got. Yeah, freedom. Use it or lose it. Thank you.
All right, anyone else want to speak? No? 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 You want to speak? Okay, before I hand back to Leah to close, if you want to follow Woman Up on X, and you'll find out when our next event is. So make sure you follow that page. I'll hand it over to you, Leah.
Thank you to everyone for coming. Really appreciate you being willing to stand out in this heat. And yeah, like Sue said, please follow us. Come, contrary to what people believe, a lot of us don't actually enjoy standing up and doing this. Standing up in the middle of Brisbane saying that men shouldn't be breastfeeding babies. But if I can just make one person who's listening to this go home and think about it a little bit more, yes, they are giving men drugs to induce lactation and to breastfeed babies, then it's worth my time coming out here and doing this. So thank you everybody for coming, and we'll see you at the next one. Woman is an adult human female. Thank you. Bye everybody.